Thank you for joining us for our class this morning. Thank you for your interest. If you are watching the premiere, then I hope that the study this morning will be a happy complement to the worship that follows. And if you're watching later, just glad that you are with us. We are continuing our study of the book of Acts. We're actually coming to the end of it, and we're seeing an almost unceasing array of trials. Paul is brought before Jews and he's brought before Roman officials, and there just seems to be no end of it. His patience, I think, is wearing a bit thin. He has retained his composure, but I think you'll see today that he's a little bit pointed in his response. And of course, what drives all of this has to be this implacable hatred, this enduring hatred of the Jews, the leadership of the Jewish nation, against Christ, against the gospel, and now against Christ's representative, the Apostle Paul. Today we'll see Paul before the Roman governor Festus. So join us now for our study. As we turn to it, you'll see this is the first 12 verses of Acts 25. And we'll begin by reading those verses. Now, 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. And they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, said he, let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. And he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days. And he went down to Caesarea. And the next day, he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there to be tried on these charges before me? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed. To Caesar you shall go. There's not too much that I could find out about Porcius Festus. There is limited material. We can know a few things. For instance, before we look at the coin here on the picture, let's look at his name, Porcius Festus. I don't know his first name. You know, Romans had 3 names. The first name we might say is a given name. There weren't many names for men, Gaius and Marcus, and ones like that. Sometimes they were numbers, Secundus and Tertius and Quartus and so forth. But the second name is the clan name, or the Romans would say the gens, G-E-N-S, gens. The clans were very important, and really your identity is particularly determined by your clan. Now the last part of your name, the last name a person had, would be the family name. So he is from the clan of Porcius, the Porcian clan, and his family is Festus. Now, to say just something about the Porcian clan, and it's just kind of interesting to me, the Porcians were among the oldest aristocratic families in Rome. They were among those who originally established the Roman Republic back in 509 approximately BC. And they were all farmers, and they were very proud of that fact. And later they had to share that power with the city people and with the commoners. But they always held on to the distinction of being one of the early families. Now, if you'll notice, Porcius sounds a lot like pork, and that, of course, is the case. Porcius is the Latin word for pig. And they were originally pig farmers. The most famous Porcian was Marcus Porcius Cato, the great statesman, and he was extremely proud of his heritage as being descended from pig farmers. So we know this much about Festus. He came from an old aristocratic Roman family. Now the coin, and by the way, this coin is available. If you'd like to buy it, you can go online and I think eBay, you can buy it. But it shows on the obverse, which would be the right picture, a palm branch, and the Greek legend Caesaro all around it, or Caesar. And then the one on the left, the reverse, is Neronos, or Nero, and it has a wreath on it. And I just about gave up trying to find a representation of Porcius Festus, but finally did. And this is a pretty good one. This is what he looked like. And the Romans were very meticulous about representing people as they actually looked. So I think we have a pretty good idea. Didn't have cameras back then, but we did have some pretty good sculptors. Now let's go to the text and look at it in some detail. 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Now that tells us that when he arrived in Caesarea, he didn't spend very long. You'd think he'd want to spend quite a bit of time just getting settled and getting unpacked and getting oriented to his new living quarters and to the new duties that awaited him in Caesarea, but only 3 days. And of course, some of that time would be travel. As a matter of fact, it usually took 2 days to go from Caesarea to Jerusalem. That would suggest he was only 1 day in Caesarea. So he was very anxious, it would seem, to get to Jerusalem. And why? Well, Jerusalem, of course, is the religious capital of Judea, not the political capital anymore. That was Caesarea. And at Jerusalem would be the Sanhedrin, the leaders of the Jews. And it was to Porcius Festus' advantage to have a good working relationship with these provincials. And they were noted for being cantankerous and obstreperous. So he, I'm sure, wanted to go there to establish that relationship right away, first thing on the agenda. And verse 2 says, the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. You will notice that it says principal men. The word there is protoi. That, of course, comes from the word that means first. And in Latin, principal actually means first, the first. And it would assume the people with the greatest position, greatest standing, greatest authority in the Sanhedrin among the leadership of the Jews. So these are the top people, if you please. The chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. Now, Luke uses the word case, but as we pointed out before, and we're going to see again today, there's no case. It is a bunch of nonsense. There is no substance, no evidence, no grounds at all for the things that they say against Paul, that he opposed the nation and he opposed the temple and he opposed the laws. He did no such thing. And we saw his answer in our study last week as he appeared before the governor Felix. But they lay out this case against Paul, same old thing, and they urged Festus, asking as a favor against Paul that he summon him to Jerusalem. You will notice that the word favor, I have the word charin in Greek there. Charin is the word for grace. So they were asking grace. We understand the definition of grace, that it is something that is bestowed upon a person without their earning it or doing anything. So here's a favor that we'd like to ask you. Not that you owe it to us. It's a charin. It's grace. And what was that favor? That he, Festus, summoned Paul to Jerusalem. And then we see the reason underlying that. They had done a little planning because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. I doubt, and I'm sure they didn't tell Festus that, but that's the reason that they wanted Festus to summon Paul to Jerusalem. They were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. This is absolutely amazing. They do not give up. It had been 2 years since that plot. The plot when there were above 40 men, we read, who plotted to kill Paul as he was leaving the Castle Antonia and obviously going across the temple courtyard to meet with the Sanhedrin, and they were going to ambush him in the temple courtyard. More than 40. Now, look, these are chief priests and principal men. The opposition has grown, but the determination to kill him has remained constant. So they're planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Think about this. Claudius Lysias found out about this plot through the original plot against Paul by the nephew. The nephew found out about the plan to assassinate Paul. So he quickly got Paul safely out of Jerusalem under cover of night, guarded by 470 soldiers. In this instance, Festus doesn't know about this plot. So they're going to assume that he will send Paul or have Paul brought with a minimum number of guards. And thus it would be easier for them to ambush him and kill him along the way. And verse 4 says, Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. Now, I think you can see in this Festus just dismissing this request and saying to these Jews, look, I am going back to Caesarea very quickly, and that's where Paul is. So I'm not going to send for him to come to Jerusalem. And he's going to say in verse 5, if you're interested in this, you can just go with me and present your charges before him in Caesarea. This would suggest, I think, that Festus had an agenda in Jerusalem, that he had planned out his visit, and that he was not going to allow this amount of time to bring Paul there. It would take several days for Paul to appear in Jerusalem, and he didn't have the time for it. Now, some have suggested that maybe he delayed his stay in Jerusalem to please them. But at this point, he simply says, I'm going back to Jerusalem. And that's where Paul is. And verse 5 says, so let the men of authority among you go down with me. And if there's anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. Now, he says, let the men of authority among you. I don't know if that's the same as the principal men, protoi. He uses the word dunatoi, oi, dunatoi in humin. Those powerful among you. And the theologians have some different opinions about this. Some people think by powerful he meant those who were physically able to make the journey, or even that they were more powerful intellectually. And I don't think that's the case. I think it does mean about the same thing as the principal men, those who have authority, power on the Sanhedrin. You select them, and they will go with me. And if there's anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. Now, when Festus says, if there's anything wrong, interesting word he uses. It's the word atopon. Topos in Greek means place. And you put the a in front of it, it negates it. So it literally says, if there's anything out of place about the man, let them bring charges against him. Anything out of place. So verse 6 says, after he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. Now, this is what I was talking about a moment ago. He actually stayed 8 or 10 days. Did that mean he stayed longer than he planned to stay? Or did he originally plan to spend 8 or 10 days and he had his agenda all worked out and he went just exactly when he wanted to go? But again, some of the commentators are going to say the 8 or 10 days means that he stayed there as a favor to the Jews. It shows them, okay, I'm going to stay a little bit longer with you in Caesarea. Others have said he stayed 8 or 10 days to look into this matter about Paul. Both of those possibilities seem a little bit stretched to me. I think probably he intended to stay 8 or 10 days, and that was the total amount of time it took for him to complete his business there and do what he planned to do. And as far as Paul is concerned, I think he gave them his answer. I'm not going to deal with Paul here. Paul is at Caesarea. That is where my headquarters are. That is where the court will be. If you have a problem, if there's anything out of place with Paul, you come with me to Caesarea. And the next day, he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. We have, in our study, noticed many times that followers of Christ are brought before the tribunal, which is to be brought before the Bema. We have, beginning with Peter and John in Jerusalem. Epi to Bematos. The Bema, remember, is a raised platform. And in a court situation, the judge is going to sit on that raised platform and the accused will stand down below. So that is the case in Caesarea. This is the, as you please, the courtroom. And we have Festus taking his seat on the Bema. And he orders Paul to be brought. Last week, we looked at the legal requirements about a trial situation or a hearing. This is not a trial really, any looking into it, investigation, but the accused had to be present with the accusers. And so he ordered Paul to be brought. And Paul, verse 7 says, when he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem, those men of authority, now stand around him. Now, this is an interesting situation. Just kind of envision this raised platform with Festus up there. And you have Paul standing down here, but all of these Jews who hate him and who are bringing charges are standing around him. In our courtrooms today, we've seen courtroom dramas on television. Many of you have been in a courtroom situation. The accused, the defendant, is normally seated at a table with his counsel, with his lawyers. And if the plaintiff is there, they are seated separately with their lawyers. And in this case, they're all just standing together. Here's Paul, and they're just, I see them ringing around him, maybe trying to intimidate him. They're standing right there with him. And notice this, what Luke is going to say. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that he could not prove. One commentator said, I think you can see in Luke here, who wrote these words, that he's writing from his perspective, and his perspective is as a Christian and as one of Paul's friends and companions in preaching the gospel. So what Luke is saying is they are against him, and they are presenting now many and serious charges. Before, we saw 3 charges presented against him. They have added some now. There are many. They have intensified in number, and they have intensified in the degree of seriousness, many and serious charges. So both quantity and quality, so to speak, of the charges have increased. They are throwing at him everything possible. This time they are determined. Many and serious charges against him, but Luke adds that they could not prove them. They could not prove any of them, no evidence whatsoever. And obviously, Festus listened to them. Obviously, Paul had to stand there right in their midst and listen to them. Now, Paul argues in his defense. Remember last week, those of you who were in our study, and it is available if you didn't have a chance to look at it, that he answered every one of their charges. He answered them directly, to the point, the three charges brought against him. In this instance, we have Paul saying one sentence only. Paul argued in his defense neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. And that's it. He doesn't go into any further explanation. And that's where I see Paul wearing a little thin here in his patience, thinking, I have answered these things over and over and over again. I have explained that I have not committed an offense against the Jews, not against the nation, not against the law, not against the temple, nothing. And then he adds this, though, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. And that's the first time we see Paul bringing that into his defense, nor against Caesar. That would probably suggest that in these many and serious charges that the Jews levied against Paul, they brought in the charge of treason against the imperial government, against Caesar. Now, that is the very reason, legal reason, that our Lord was crucified. You think back to the time that Jesus was tried before Pilate, the Jews were bringing up charges that had no legal bearing in a Roman court, such things as he made himself a god, he called himself the Son of God. That was of no interest to Pontius Pilate. But then they came back with the charge he claims to be the king of Israel. And you recall the account in John, Pilate asked Jesus, are you then a king? And he said, you say truly, I am a king. But my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my followers would fight that I should be delivered from the Jews. But my kingdom is not from here. Well, Pilate, of course, was satisfied with that, but the Jews, of course, pressed him for crucifying Christ and releasing Barabbas. But remember, on the cross, he put the official charge for which Jesus was crucified. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Obviously, Romans couldn't care less about Jewish religious practices and Jewish laws, and whether or not somebody claims to be God, or whether or not someone claims that the law has been fulfilled in Christ, as Paul was doing. But they do care about treason. That is not permitted. And the Jews knew that. So I think they've added in their charge, their many and serious charges, he is against Caesar, against the emperor. But Festus, verse 9, wishing to do the Jews a favor, and notice again, grace. They had asked, would you do a favor for us? Would you extend grace to us by sending for Paul to come to Jerusalem? At that point, as we saw, Festus declined. He said, basically, I'm too busy. I'm going back to Jerusalem, to Caesarea right away, and you can send some men with me, some men of power. But now he gives in. And this is a weakness, I think, in Festus. Festus would have known, listening to all this, that the charges against Paul were baseless, and he should have dismissed those charges immediately. But now he turns to Paul and asks him, will you allow me to send you to Jerusalem? Will you go up with me to Jerusalem? Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? That is exactly what the Jews wanted him to do. It is the favor, the charin, that they had originally asked. And now he yields to them and gives in to them. Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? Notice he doesn't say, do you want to go to Jerusalem and be tried before the Sanhedrin? Festus could not do that because Festus knows that Paul is a Roman citizen. Therefore, he cannot turn him over to the Sanhedrin to be judged. He has to be judged before Festus. So what he's saying is, I'll go up to Jerusalem. You go with me. These people go with me. And you'll be tried there on these charges, but I will do the judging. And you see his weakness there. But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. Now, that's a plain, straightforward response that does indeed, I think, show that Paul has had it with this situation over and over and over again, being charged with the same thing and with no proof. And so he says to Festus, Festus, I am standing right now in this courtroom before this bema. I am standing before Caesar's tribunal. This court is Caesar's court. This is the imperial court, the official court where I ought to be tried. Where I ought to be tried. This is where I ought to be tried, not in Jerusalem. And then he says to the Jews, I have done no wrong. And he uses the word, we talked about this last week, adikeme, and of course the basic root word here, if you see in the Greek, is this delta iota kappa, dikaios, means righteous, just. Diakosune is justification. So it is that word that is a legal term that, as far as the law is concerned, forensically, I have done nothing wrong. I have done nothing against the Jews that is illegal, that is worthy of punishment. And then he turns to Festus, and I think he looked right at him and he said, as you yourself know very well, Festus, you know very well that I have committed no wrong. You know very well that I am innocent of all these charges. I think that would have perhaps created a little sting in Festus' heart at that point. And then he says, if then I am a wrongdoer, and here's the same word, a little different spelling and form, it's the same word. You can see the three letters that represent legal righteousness, legal right or wrong, delta, iota, kappa, dik. So in this case, adiko, I am not, if I then am a wrongdoer, have done something legally wrong, and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. Yeah, yes, if you can prove it. If there is something I have done that violates the law of Rome, then I'm willing to die. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, and notice I've underlined the next two words, no one can give me up to them. And who could give him up to the Jews? The only one person who could give him up to the Jews was Porcius Festus. And once again, I think he's looking right in the eyes of Porcius Festus. And Porcius Festus would have known that Paul was referring to him. No one, in other words, you cannot give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. As a Roman citizen, he had the right to appeal to the emperor. Any Roman citizen, every Roman citizen had that legal right. They could, even in the middle of a trial, if they felt the trial was not going well, which is probably the case here, They could simply say, look, I make my appeal to the emperor. And that appeal always had to be granted. And that meant that the emperor himself would sit in judgment on that person. Originally, when in the days of the Roman Republic, before the Principate or the empire was established, the appeal was to the Roman people. The Republic was set up on the idea that the Senate and the Roman people constituted the state, the Senate and Roman people. And the Senate was representative of the people. Therefore, the trials were held in the Senate building still standing in Rome. But when one man took over and the Senate lost its power, and now that person, the emperor or the princeps, is referred to as Caesar, he replaced the people. It's now an appeal to this one man, who, by the way, is Nero. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, "To Caesar you have appealed. To Caesar you shall go." Now, he first went to his council, which is probably a wise idea. But I expect what he did when he went into the council and convened with his counselors was to say, is there any reason that Paul should not go to Caesar? Do you see any reason that I should not send him? Well, of course, Festus knew there was no reason that he should not send him, but he did confer with his council. And since I don't know exactly Festus' intention, we don't know whether he's conferring with his council to look if there's a way out and he can say no, or simply to confirm the fact that he should go to see Caesar. At any rate, obviously the council is going to advise him that he should have his appeal. So he comes back out from his meeting with the council and he says, "To Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go." That's it. Now remember, Paul had been wanting to go to Rome. He had written his letter to the Romans earlier from Corinth, and he said he planned to go. He did not anticipate going as a prisoner, and that God had revealed that to him. Revealed to him, first of all, that if you go to Jerusalem, you're going to be placed in chains, in bonds, and that happened. And then he appeared to him in a vision. He said, "You're going to be my witness in Rome." So obviously he's going to be his witness in Rome in a state of being a prisoner. A prisoner, he's free and yet not free. He's not in bonds anymore. He's not treated with contempt. He's just put under house arrest. And that is the way it was from the time of Claudius Lysias in Jerusalem, now in Caesarea, and then in Rome, 3 different places. Now, before we leave our study today, I'd just like to point out we've dealt with 2 subjects in this study. One is religion, and the other is politics. And I know people say those are 2 subjects that you should never talk about because they're controversial. Well, they were controversial back then. Religion involved both Romans and Jews. And this is kind of interesting. Of course, the Romans are here represented by Porcius Festus, and Paul's on his way to the very city of Rome to appear before Nero. But the Romans were by nature a very religious people. You know, I said a moment ago that they were proud of their agricultural roots. They were farmers, and they were extremely moral people. They're also extremely religious people. Their religion was expressed in many different ways, which I won't go into in detail right now, but let's just simply say that by nature, Romans were religious. By nature, Romans were moral people. And when you read of examples of immorality in some of the emperors, including the one before whom Paul is about to appear, they were aberrations. That's not the rule among Romans. As a matter of fact, even at the end of the Roman Empire, you find some of the authors, the poets like Pausanias, writing and saying, we need to affirm our moral character. So yes, the Romans are religious. And that might be one reason that Christianity triumphed in the context of the Roman Empire. Because I see religion in that broad sense of the word as oftentimes in reference to Jesus' parable of the sower, God cultivating the field to sow the seed. And when a person is religious and believes in the supernatural, believes there's a God, believes that there's a system of accountability, when that person has that in mind, it becomes easier for them to accept Christ. I recall many, many years ago, when I was a young Christian and first attending this particular church, the preacher was very knowledgeable. And I remember one of his first series of sermons was the conversion of religious people, using examples in the book of Acts, which is indeed true. We've seen that. Now, that being the case, that might help us to understand how quickly Rome accepted Christ. I have a book written by Ramsay MacMullen called The Christianization of the Roman Empire. Now, at the same time, of course, there is persecution, and this man before whom Paul is going to appear, who's going to be his judge in Rome, namely the Emperor Nero, is the one who initiated the first persecution against the Christians. That's interesting. Paul initiated a persecution against the Christians in Jerusalem, later was converted. Nero initiated a persecution against the Christians in Rome. Certainly he was not converted. But of course the Jews, from the beginning, when God created the nation of Israel, there is that religious base of it. This is the work of God when he called Abraham. And so they continued to be very religious people. But at this point, I found in James Montgomery Boyce's commentary, religion can be very evil. And all of you know that. There are cults, there are false religions that do terrible things. Even people claiming to be Christians who are led astray. Religion can be a tool of tremendous harm to people. It's a powerful thing. Religion can incite people, can cause a commitment in people, and thus they are motivated to act. And if it is a good thing, if it is the truth, then of course the result is going to be wonderful acts of kindness and love and grace. But if it is evil, then religion can be a source of tremendous damage and harm. Now, the early Christians, of course, were Jews and come out of that religious context. And incidentally, a situation where in Israel, it was the church, so to speak, and the state combined. It was a theocracy. And of course, Christ was a Jew. Now we find the Apostle Paul in that situation, an Israelite, brought up as a Jew, as a devout Jew, converted to Christ. And because of that, on his way now to Rome, a man who once persecuted the cause, now one who believes in the cause of Christ, who is going to take his case before the Roman Emperor Nero. And then before we leave, it's also a study in politics. And there are a couple of points I want to make. It's very, very important. Roman law, and I think we've seen that before, was designed to provide ultimate justice to its citizens. They were meticulous. They were very, very careful about Roman citizens receiving justice, always. I've read a little bit in preparation for the class today from Cicero's treatise on the Commonwealth. Now, Cicero is a great statesman, lived at the time of the end of the Roman Revolution, time of Julius Caesar and Gaius Pompey and so forth. Actually was put to death by Mark Antony. But Cicero was a great believer in and defender of the Roman Republic and the Roman laws, believed in them, extolled them. And it's interesting, as I read through that, Cicero is going to say, there is a God who is in control of everything, and everything that happens is the result of his will. And that's an interesting point. He begins in that concept of God. And of course, the laws to a Roman like Cicero are going to come from God in one way or another. And then he had an interesting study on the word law. And I mention this because it illustrates the point very well. The Greeks have a word for law, which is nomos. And that is the word for actually food, with the concept of law provides good for people, like food provides good for their health. The law provides good for them, protecting them and allowing them to live a good life. And then Cicero said, but the Latin word for law is lex. And the root of it, the etymology of it is that lex means a discrimination, a separation. In other words, lex brings out the idea that law will separate truth from untruth, will separate justice from injustice, right from wrong. That's the point of law. And the Romans were dedicated to that. But just as religion can sometimes go awry, sometimes politicians sacrifice justice for political favor. And I think you can see that Festus is leaning in that way of making a compromise with the Jews. Now, Jewish law also protected the innocent. And we can go back and look at the Old Testament, at the law in the first 5 books of the Bible, in the Pentateuch, and see that innocent people are protected. They must be proven wrong and guilty. And yet, this Jewish law that was so well designed and set up failed to protect both Jesus and now Paul, as Roman law is not coming through for Paul as it did not for Jesus. And hatred and prejudice, which we've seen with the Jews, can cause terrible violations of law. So law, politics, religion come together in this account. It's very interesting. And I think Luke is not writing as a disinterested party, just giving us the historical account. Remember, Luke is a Christian. Luke is a friend of Paul. Luke is involved in preaching the gospel with Paul. So he is writing, I think, from the standpoint of pointing out some of these inequities. And I think that Luke was actually there and observed these incidents himself. And wondering, since he's a Gentile, how these Jews can be so committed to Yahweh, to God, and to the law, and yet treat one of their own in this way. Well, we're going to see more of Paul's troubles and Paul's trials in our study next week. He's not yet off to Rome because he will once again appear before Festus, but there's going to be an additional 2 people to whom he's going to speak, and one of them is a king. So may you have a good week, a blessed week, and look forward to being with you next week.